Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're going to wait a few moments to let everybody log in. Welcome to another session of Wacom webinars. Hello, Maddy.
Hello. Thanks so much for
Welcome.
having me.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Very fascinating topic today.
Yeah, it's going to be a good one. I'm excited.
Me too. We don't often have user experience designers in our channels, and very happy that you're also an Adobe Creative Resident. So
That's right.
that's right. Welcome, everybody. We're going to get started in a few minutes. This will be a class and sort of an intro class to user experience design, highlighting Maddy's process. Maddy is a strategic designer with a focus on UI, UX design in the wellness space. Empathy, cognitive psychology, and digital well-being are all driving forces behind her work. And today she's going to talk to us a little bit about her process. I'm your host, Elizabeth Garcia, social media manager for Wacom. This will be around an hour session, including Q&A. Please use the Q&A feature to submit your questions, as the chat is mostly used for socializing and networking, and it moves really quickly. So if you have some questions that you really want Maddy to address, please use the Q&A. We are also sharing this via Facebook, and the session is being recorded and will be shared later on YouTube for those people who may have to leave early. Thank you for attending the Wacom webinar series. We have some offers for you if you're interested in getting some Wacom gear. We have the Wacom One at B&H, and as well as Annex Pro for our Canada customers. Please write down the codes and take advantage of some sweet deals. Again, we are with Maddy Beard, 2020 Adobe Creative Resident and UX designer, talking to it and today about mindful UX design. Maddy, I'm going to stop talking and let you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more.
Sure. Thanks so much, Elizabeth. All right. Just going to hop over, start sharing this presentation. We'll get right into it. Okay. So as Elizabeth said, my name is Maddy Beard, and I am the UI UX Creative Resident this year at Adobe. I'm a strategic designer with a focus on UI UX design in the wellness space. Empathy, cognitive psychology, and digital well-being are all driving forces behind my work. And this year, as a resident, I'm exploring ways to help people achieve their wellness goals using tech, and at the same time, actively designing these products to promote more mindful tech use. So if you are brand new to UX design, which many of you may be because this is sort of an intro to the process, I want to kind of break it down a little bit into these three pieces that I feel are super important. So it's important to know that as a UX designer, you really do or should be very cognizant of cognitive psychology, of brain science. And so by reading and learning about how the brain works, we can better design our products for technological interfaces. And these are, kind of those three big pieces, but there's much, much more that goes into this, like lots of research, testing, and that kind of thing that might be different from a lot of other creative disciplines. So that's really the point of me sharing this process with you all, because it might be pretty different from what you're used to. Maybe you're really interested in getting into UX design. So I'd love to hear, actually, I won't be able to see it yet, but once the presentation's over and I get to questions, I would love to hear what your creative field is if you're currently a creative. So go ahead and talk amongst yourselves in the chat about those things. And I would love to kind of see, or maybe Elizabeth can jump in and tell me what are the biggest, groups of creatives that we have here today. I'll give you a minute to share in the chat, and then I'd love to know.
Yeah, guys, please tell us in the chat what your field is and where you're joining us from. We have some people from San Diego, some from Argentina, from Atlanta. Welcome, everybody.
That's great.
I do see here that we have some designers, some UX designers,
Awesome.
information architecture,
Oh, great.
an editorial designer here, digital marketers.
Excellent.
Yeah, we have people in the Bay Area, graphic designers, illustration, industrial designers. Thank you so much, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. That's awesome. Cool. It's good to know kind of where people are coming from. So today, in order to show you what my process looks like, I'm actually going to dive into my most recent project. So this is Essence. It is a smart diffuser app that promotes mindfulness through automation. And this was my very first project for the Adobe Creative Residency this year. So what is my very first step when it comes to a project like this? Research planning. So research should always be sort of your North Star when it comes to designing interfaces. And before you can even start to research, if you want to do effective research, you've got to plan that research. So I'm going to walk through a little bit about how I do that. So I started with a basic idea. I knew I wanted to focus on, the wellness space, and for the Adobe Creative Residency, I'm actually able to work on these case studies for my portfolio. And I can partner with brands if I want to, but if I want to just explore a topic separate from any client work, then that's exactly what I can do to build my portfolio. So I had this basic idea for what I wanted to explore for my first project. The basic idea was that I believe there's an opportunity for an enhanced experience surrounding aromatherapy products, specifically essential oil diffusers used at home. I want to design a solution that promotes increased wellness and mindfulness in the home. And so once I kind of had that idea down, then I started to do some background research, really, is what this is. So as you can see, it's nothing fancy. This is just a Google Doc where I've taken down some notes. I've looked at the market of aromatherapy and essential oils. Who are the big players? What are some companies that I see a lot on social media? Are any of these companies coming out with smart diffusers? That would be really important to know. What personas am I seeing reflected in the marketing? And any other notes. And as I'm doing this background research, I start to come up with some questions that I still have, like gaps in my understanding of this industry and who is using these products and why. And so that is all in preparation to come up with this research plan. So this is actually a document that I create each time I start a new project, where I outline the research goals that I have, what methodology I'm going to be using to carry out that research. And, with that methodology, are there any participant tasks that I would want the participants to do as part of the research? I also outline participant criteria, and that's really important because then I know who to recruit and where to look for people to participate in the study. So, should they have a certain age range? Should they have certain experiences, knowledge, that kind of thing? And lastly, a timeline, just to set myself some, parameters for when I'm going to get this done. So then once I have done all of those, all of that planning, then I'm ready to start recruiting. So what I do next is I come up with a social media post as well as a survey. And so just a little tidbit is that when you're doing UX research, it's really important not to give away too much until, the interview, or even later on in the interview, you may not want to give away exactly what you are researching about. So as you guys know, I was researching about aromatherapy, but as you can see here, this is a very general self-care study survey. And so aromatherapy is just a piece of it, and that's just to help me figure out who would be a good fit for the interviews themselves. And so here is kind of what the data looked like coming back. I knew that I wanted to interview women age 25 to 35 who use aromatherapy at least once a week. So I had to gather this data to see who that really was, and yeah, who would be a good fit to interview there. So I had a few people to choose from. I believe it was 28 that met all those criteria, and I chose 12 women to participate. I chose 3 who live alone, 3 who live with their partner, 3 who live with roommates, and 3 who live with a partner and at least 1 child. And so sort of at the same time that I was doing all of that recruiting and figuring out who my participants would be, I was also writing this discussion guide. And so what is really the point of this discussion guide? Basically, when you're doing conversational interviews, which is what I decided to do because I really wanted to gain empathy with my users and have a little bit of a deeper conversation, since mindfulness and self-care were really sort of at the center of what I wanted to learn about. That's, not really a topic you can learn about with more quantitative methods. So I knew I wanted to do this conversational interview. And so I really split it up into lots of these different topics. I wanted to ask them about their home environment. I wanted to ask them about their relationship to mindfulness, wellness, and tech. I wanted to ask about their relationship or their experience with their current essential oil diffuser, as well as how they feel about tech being a part of their self-care routines. That was really important for me to learn so that I could create a solution that would actually integrate with people's lives without being too disruptive. And so the other important thing about coming up with this discussion guide is that it allows me to go general to specific. So like I said in the very beginning, I really didn't want to give away that I was talking about a smart diffuser app. So I was really just starting out with their home environment, those types of things. And even within those specific topics, whenever you're interviewing someone, you don't really know if they're going to be someone who really likes to share, really likes to talk, and will sort of go off on tangents and give you a lot of really helpful stuff, or if they're going to be someone who's a little bit more reserved and answers just with quick answers and then, kind of stays silent until you ask the next question. So a discussion guide really helps you to start with the first question. So let's say, maybe when do you use your diffuser was one of my questions. One person might talk about how they use their diffuser, for the next 10 minutes, and I would get so much really helpful information and insight. But one person might also say, okay, when do you use your diffuser? I use my diffuser every night, or I use my diffuser once a week. That's not super helpful. So I want to dig deeper. And so then I have other questions such as what parts of the day, during what activities, what reminds you to use it, what triggers or motivators are associated with it. Are there certain scenarios or times when you find yourself using it more versus less? So those types of things really, or those types of questions, it really helps me to write those out ahead of time and use this as a discussion guide so that no matter who I'm talking to, I have a lot to work off of. So then once I did all 12 of those interviews, it was time to synthesize those findings. So just like many UX designers, I went straight to my blank wall with a bunch of sticky notes. And so what I really did here was I wanted to first break up some of what I noticed into different categories. So things like motivators, distractions, things like that, where I wanted to just jot down tons and tons of things that people mentioned and group them. So that's exactly what I did here. And I also took those interview recordings and put the audio into Otter, which is something that transcribes it all for you. And that way you can tag certain things. And, it's not totally necessary that you do this, but for some, if for some projects, if you really want a lot of data and you have to sort of show your work and provide a research report, that can be really helpful. So I was able to cross-reference, a lot of the people who live alone use their diffuser at this time of day. Like, that's really interesting. Why might that be? Things like that. I'm able to highlight certain words, keywords within the interviews and cross-reference things to find patterns. So that's what I used Otter for. And then once I sort of did both of those things, came up with what I felt was important enough to continue thinking about with this project, then I started a very, very early version of the information architecture. And that's what you're seeing in this bottom right photo. I have routines as a section. I have SOS as a section, which is like, okay, maybe you're having a panic moment and what oils could help you. At one point, I thought that was going to be one of the core functionalities of the app. I have a learn section and I have a benefits section. And so this is just super, super early. Me just kind of breaking up that information to see how it might live and how it might connect with each other in the app. All right, and then I kind of went back to that first group of sticky notes and created this empathy map. So an empathy map, if you're not familiar, is sort of similar to a persona exercise or the jobs to be done exercise, which are both pretty common within UX. But I actually really like the empathy mapping exercise more. It has you think about goals and constraints, what the user might be saying, thinking, and feeling around the time they're using the product, what they might be seeing, what they would be hearing around them, what tasks and actions are associated with it, what distractions might be going on around them, what deep motivators do they have that makes them want to use the app, and lastly, what frustrations might come up that either the app would trigger or that the app might be able to actually help. And so that is really what empathy mapping is. And it's just a really good way to, obviously get some empathy for your user, which is super, super important as a UX designer. All right, then the next step is sketching and wireframing. So what I do for my sketching process is a couple of different things. First, what I'll do is the really, really rough version of sketches where I'll sit down, literally sit on the floor next to the wall where I've just done all my Post-it note exercises. And I will just in my notebook start sketching. And as you can see here, these are super, super rough. I have things crossed out. I have notes made. All of these things. This is nothing beautiful at all. It's just the very first thoughts about what the app might look like. And then I actually move on to either printing a bunch of these sheets out to do some more sketching, or what I've recently been doing with my Wacom tablet is kind of overlaying some sketching on top of that image. And I've really been loving doing that using Fresco, Adobe Fresco as well. because I can erase really easily. I don't have to print out a ton of pages. And what I can do is just keep adding layers and sort of hiding the one that I'm finished with or whatever. And I can save them as JPEGs if I want to save a series of 3. But it allows me to be really iterative and just sort of save and then clear, save and then clear them and start over. And I really, really like that for this phase of the process, because being iterative and not being stuck on any one screen or solution is super important whenever you're first starting to sketch. And so this is what my screens ended up looking like, not all of them, but some of the sketches that I felt were worth showing here. And so as you can see, these are still not very nice looking. They're still very, very early iterations of what this could be like. But it's just enough to help me figure out what the information architecture should be. And so it's sort of a process of going back and forth between those sketches and then the information architecture. And then, oh, wait, this doesn't really work. Let me go back and figure this out with the sketches. Okay, I think I got that figured out. Now let's rework the information architecture, and then on and on. It's sort of like a cycle like that for me until I have things in a good place and I feel like I can move on to wireframing in XD. And so these are just some of the wireframes I created in XD. And what I really like to do is create these sort of grayscale screens, but with some things that are colored, as you can see, like the things that are really important. So I don't really have rules for creating these wireframes. I don't use any of those wireframing templates or assets. There are tons and tons of those that are really, really helpful actually in certain XD plugins. There's a wireframe plugin, for example, but I actually just like to make shapes, make them into components, and then just kind of go crazy and see what I can come up with for those wireframes. And that's because eventually I'm going to be taking the exact components you're seeing and styling them once I feel like they're in a good place. So I want them to be my creations, if that makes sense. So then once I get wireframes in a good place, then it's time to test them. So for this, I conducted moderated usability testing both in person and remote. And what I focused on was setting up the first ritual, editing rituals, as well as diffusing an oil, just a one-off oil that's separate from these rituals. And so I like to do testing in this way where I pose different scenarios to the test subject and see how they move through coming up with those things, those solutions. So the first scenario I said was, let's say you wanted to diffuse calming aromas every day as you transition out of work mode. How would you set that up? And so I went in and I just watched them sort of try to do this and see if they stumbled over anything, if certain things were really unclear, if they had to ask me questions, and I was able to glean a lot from that. And there are a couple other scenarios here too. And that's sort of how I came up with these key learnings. So a lot of my key learnings came from my research interviews, but then these more specific learnings came from my testing. So I learned that people need more feedback from the app, to not reinvent the wheel, and to use mental models. So there was actually a specific test that I went through with a person where they mentioned the iOS alarm app. And that's because there was the rituals, a screen with all of your rituals to them really looked like the alarm app, but it didn't function exactly the same. So they were very confused. And so that was a huge, huge turning point in the designs where I ended up just using pretty much the same exact functionality as the iOS alarm app. And it became really a lot more clear to users how they were supposed to use it, because many, many people are used to that functionality. And lastly, I learned that preparing a new ritual should require as little action as possible. So I just found ways to get rid of a couple different actions and clicks and taps to make it flow more smoothly. Okay, and now on to the fun part. So once I came up with those key learnings and figured out what things I actually wanted to change, then it was time to actually move on to the designs. So for the designs, as you might imagine, I use Adobe XD as well. And what I really do is go into those wireframes and style them in ways that makes the most sense. And a lot of times my wireframes, from wireframing to design, they change a lot. So not only is the styling going to change, but lots of other things change too, like layouts and sometimes even certain flows will change as well. And in this scenario, I actually nixed a whole part of the app because I felt that it wasn't focused enough and I wanted it to just solve one problem instead of a bunch of problems. So whenever it came to design, that's when this really came together and it became a really tight product. And of course, a big part of that is the visual system. So I came up with this color palette because I wanted it to feel natural and grounding, and, healthy. But at the same time, I wanted it to have some colors that would catch your attention if they needed to. And same goes for the typography. I wanted to keep it subtle and readable, but still choose a font for the headers that was interesting and maybe something that is different from what people see in a lot of other products. And another really fun part of this process was that I needed to create a lot of icons. So instead of taking the time to create all of these, which ideally I would have loved to do, I just didn't have the time for it. And again, it wasn't my focus for this project. I actually was able to download these from Adobe Stock, and they came from a bunch of different sort of packs by a lot of different artists. And so I was able to bring them into XD and actually change the thickness of the lines and the line quality to make them all look really nice together, like they're all branded sort of under the same family. And the last step was to actually put together my case study. And so if you're someone who wants to get more into UX, this is actually a really important part of the process, is being able to show your work, articulate your decisions, and make it something that's really interesting to read through. And so how I did this was I actually strung artboards together vertically because I knew I wanted to share this on Behance. And with Behance, if you don't know, that's sort of how you scroll through, is you can tie images together vertically and they just seamlessly run into one another. So I had all of the control I really needed to be able to design this almost as a web page, just with different images all strung together. And so you're also probably seeing here that I've got a lot of artboards going horizontally. And that's the other really cool thing about what I was able to do, is I was able to use Adobe XD's auto animate feature and record what different animations would look like, what different interactions would look like, and then export that as an MP4, open it up into Photoshop, and save it as a GIF that I could use in my Behance case study. And so here is an example of what that looks like. Hopefully you're able to see the moving GIF here. It's very subtle, but I just wanted to show this interaction. And so by using that method of going from XD to Photoshop, and then exporting it as a GIF that is smaller sized and optimized for Behance, I was able to show so much more rather than just using all flat screens. And so if you're interested in looking at the rest of this case study, feel free to check it out. I'm just at behance.net/MaddyBeard. And yeah, if you ever have questions about the case study, then yeah, I would be more than happy to answer them. This was one of the first case studies I was able to put together where it was just an exploration for me. So I had so much freedom to do all the research that I wanted. And what's actually really exciting is because I put this out there onto Behance, a client found me and they are actually creating a smart diffuser, the actual hardware, but have not yet started on the app. And so I was actually hired by them to work for them, all because I put out this case study and sort of dedicated a few months to a project that I was really passionate about. Now I actually get to work on a project that's super similar and actually get paid. So that's just kind of to show you that even if you're working on something that's not for a client, it can go a long way to getting you this type of clients that you want. Thank you so much for listening. And now I think we're going to move on to answer some questions.
Yes, we are. Thank you. Thank you so much for the very thorough explanation of your process. It's very organized. I've always loved watching user experience designers work, being working closely with them, but I've never had it explained to me step by step the way you did. So thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me to talk about it.
Yes, we have some questions here from the audience.
Awesome.
So Josh wants to know, what did Maddy study? Was it a roundabout process to get where you are today? And if you have any words for new people in the industry.
Yeah, good question. So I actually studied graphic design at Penn State. And so at the time when I was taking my courses there actually wasn't a whole lot of digital design courses. We took like one web design course, but that's really about it. It was a lot of traditional graphic design, like branding, editorial, packaging, and that kind of thing. And so then my first job out of college ended up being at a tech company where I just learned on the job. And so yeah, it's something where your skills can definitely translate, but learning things like research and the process is all things that you can learn either through courses or just through practice.
Excellent. We have a web designer here, Tom, asking if you have some advice on how to transition from web design to UI UX design.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a lot of web designers already have a lot of understanding of UX best practices and that type of thing. What's really important to keep in mind in terms of, like I was saying, cognitive psychology and all of that. But I guess if you're looking to learn more about that, then there are a couple of resources I would check out. So, um, there's a book called Mindful Design, which has been something that's really helped me sort of make the switch from, oh, I'm just a designer, to, oh, there are all of these things that I'm sort of responsible for keeping in mind. So Mindful Design is a really good book to check out if you sort of want to switch your mindset from web designer to UX designer. And I think separate from that, there are courses that you can take if you really think that you sort of need a more professional and academic way of learning it. But also, if you think you have a good understanding and you want to just learn by doing, then I would really recommend just doing sort of exactly what I did here and do a practice project and put that in your portfolio, get it out into the world that this is the work you want to be doing. And then little by little, maybe a small project will come in, maybe a friend will want to partner with you on something. You'll be able to build your portfolio. And then, as you probably know, the work that, the more work you do, the more of those same types of projects are going to come in the door. So yeah, I guess that would be my advice. There's a lot of different ways you could go.
Excellent. Is Mindful Design a book also about cognitive experience or cognitive learning? So somebody was
Yes.
asking if you have a recommendation for a book on cognitive learning.
Yes, it is. Mindful design has lots and lots about cognitive psychology. And it's great because it's not just a book about cognitive psychology, it's a book about cognitive psychology for designers. And so, yeah, the context is perfect for learning exactly what you're going to be doing. It's got a lot of processes. That's where I learned about the empathy mapping technique. So yeah, highly recommend that. And other sources are humanetech.org or .com. They are a great place to go because they will actually sort of point you out to different resources on different things. Trying to think what else. John Yablonsky, I believe is his name. He also has a site on mindful design and more cognitive psychology uh, frameworks that you should know about when designing. So yeah, there's lots and lots.
Thank you, Maddy. Lisette Nunez is curious about your surveys. Do you have a favorite app to use to send and develop surveys?
Yeah, I really just use Google Forms. So I haven't really used much else. And I know that's a pretty simple one, but it's been great for what I've had to do so far. And it's super easy to see your data afterwards too, by question or by participant, that kind of thing. So that's worked really well for me.
Josh wants to know, what coding skills do you rely on? Do you have, does Maddy ideate and create, or are you the designer who passes the design off to the programmers?
So let me make sure I understand the question. I am not a developer. I do not code. I do not have any coding skills besides a understanding of HTML and CSS. I just as an example, I use Webflow, and so that's about my extent of coding knowledge. But yeah, so I ideate and create and design, and then yes, I pass off that design to programmers.
Edwin Tejada, you use Adobe Fresco to sketch, but what about Adobe Photoshop Sketch? Is Fresco better for sketching, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it could be just a personal preference, but I like Fresco because I'm just used to it. And let's see, I think I don't I don't do a whole lot on Photoshop, to be honest, except for editing photos. And so I've never been someone like even back in design school, I never designed in Photoshop. I would always design in Illustrator and InDesign and those types of things. And so I just don't have a ton of the technical skills for Photoshop. And I just find that Fresco is more intuitive for me personally for that kind of thing.
Thank you, Maddy. Marit Christensen really loves your empathy map and is wondering if it's available to download anywhere as an image.
Oh, that's such a good question. I might have to do that. So it's not available to download, but you can, I think if you Google empathy map, you'll be able to see one a lot like mine, or you could even go to that Behance case study and see exactly what all of the different pieces are and create one for yourself. But that's a very good idea. I should make a downloadable one.
So I know that you just started working on the Cintiq. They are wondering how you like it and if it's an easier experience when you're laying stuff out.
Yeah, definitely. I really like it. I just like that I can use the pen. I think that is probably my favorite thing about it. And I love that it's like really large. So I do have an iPad as well. And so sometimes I'll do a little bit of sketching on there, but I just love how the Cintiq is like really large and just allows me like for the sketches in particular, I really like to work big and just use a brush that's really large, and so that I'm not tempted to get into the details. But I think it's really satisfying to design using these big screens, but also like a big marker, like I'm just kind of on a whiteboard almost. And that's sort of what I miss about working in an office, is having that whiteboard. And for me, it's sort of like the equivalent to that.
Thank you, Maddy. For the research part, is there a specific method that you always stick to, or it depends on the project you're working on? Edwin Tejada wants to find out.
Yeah, so it definitely depends on the project that you're working on. But for me, I do like to lean on conversational interviews as a foundational research method. And by that, I mean how I figure out exactly what problem I'm even going to solve, and sort of how the beginning parts of the solution will look. And then when it comes to testing the product, then it really depends. At a time like this, it's really hard to do field studies or ethnography where you're in the environment with the person, in context, and watching them use the product in context. But I think that for lots of scenarios is really important. And so, yeah, I think especially for people who are new to UX and you want to get into UX research, I think it's important not to get too bogged down into the methods and exactly which one is the perfect method for this scenario. If you're working at a big company, you can absolutely have the freedom to do that, and the privilege of a big budget for research and a lot of time. But if it's just you trying to learn, I would encourage you to just choose the one that makes the most sense, that you feel like you can carry out within the timeline and budget that you can set aside. And yeah, that would be my advice there. But talking to users and having that conversation, that one-on-one conversation, or even a group conversation, like human to human, is definitely my preference.
Thank you, Maddy. You touched on it a little bit in this answer, but Carolyn Brown was wondering earlier if your testing methods have changed due to COVID restrictions.
Yeah, so that's a good question. A lot of the testing I used to do, like pre-residency when I was working at a tech company, was just very ad hoc research, ad hoc usability testing, or I guess you would call it guerrilla testing, where I would literally just go to the mall or a coffee shop and offer up gift cards for people to test the product. And so that's obviously not something I can do anymore. And I've had to get creative in terms of really understanding what a person's stuck on over Zoom. Usability testing in that way is pretty tricky for me. And I may get better at it with practice, but it's definitely tricky to not be able to look over someone's shoulder as they're working. But on the foundational research front, as opposed to the usability research front, I've actually loved being able to do Zoom interviews, because I'm actually, like I mentioned with field studies, virtually, I'm actually in context with the person. So for this project specifically, I wanted to know a lot about their home environment, because that's where they would be using this diffuser. And so it was great for me to actually be there and be there virtually, and they could even show me around just by moving their laptop around a little bit. I could say, will you show me where your diffuser is? Can you show me how you use it? Can you show me how many drops you would normally put in? Like, it's almost as if I am there, and I never in any other scenario would be able to be in a user's home. And so that's just sort of something that I really, really enjoyed about this type of research that I did not expect, sort of coming out of the challenges of COVID.
Very interesting. Front view to their bedroom.
Yeah.
Anything, yeah. Steph Kaiser is interested in knowing if you use the same participants in the testing phase as you do in the foundation research phase.
Good question. I did not. I probably could have, but I ended up using some different people, and I actually used people in my life who I could look over their shoulder. For half of, my participants were people who maybe didn't fully fall into the demographic, but would still be able to make a good usability test participant, because it was just so important to me to actually be able to see them interact with the phone with the app on it. And so that's a good question. I think in a perfect world, I would maybe come back to those people. But on the other hand, I think sometimes that can add a little bit of a bias. And so maybe it would be good to find some new people. Totally depends on your project, but I think that's a good question.
Great question. Thank you. Keep them coming. Adam Rodriguez wants to know, what Adobe XD plugins do you use to make dynamic prototypes, if any?
Yeah, so what's nice about XD is you actually don't need any plugins to make dynamic prototypes. The auto animate feature and just the prototyping feature. So if you aren't someone who uses XD has a design tab, a prototyping tab, and a share tab. And so it's really easy to design your screens, hop over to the prototyping tab, and string together all of your interactions. And then you can share that out and prototype with it and stuff. So yeah, I really, really like that actually. That's one of my favorite things about XD is you do not need any sort of plugin to have that functionality.
Thank you, Maddy. Do you think the user experience design market is oversaturated? Janice Chan is wondering.
That's a good question. I don't think so. I should say this. It, I think that a really good user experience designer is hard to come by, but yes, a lot of people are looking to get into user experience design. And so the way that I sort of try to combat that, because I am not a veteran in UX design. As I mentioned, I studied graphic design in college, and that was only 4 years ago that I graduated. So I have not been in the field for, decades or anything like that. And so as someone who is trying to sort of compete or at least find my place in the industry, what I've learned is to niche down a little bit. And so not only am I learning a lot about mindful design and how to design ethically and all of this stuff, that's setting me apart. But also all of the projects that I focus on now are in the wellness space. And so that's sort of setting me apart. And so if you look at the number of UX designers in the world, it's a lot. If you look at the number of UX designers who focus on mindful design, it's a bit less. If you look at all the UX designers who focus on mindful design in the wellness space, that's a lot smaller of a group. So that's to say that you could find something that you're really interested in, whether it's an industry or a focus. Maybe your focus is on design systems. Maybe your focus is on, let's see, social media, literally anything like that you could focus on to make yourself stand out a little bit. And so I would really encourage you not to be afraid to get into an industry because you think it's oversaturated. I would look at sort of what you want your life and career to look like, what you're passionate about, and use those things to stand out in the industry.
Well, Maddy, we have a lot of questions, but I do want to take a little parenthesis here and just tell you that a lot of our viewers are asking me to thank you for the presentation and for giving them such great insight. There you are, guys. I'm thanking her. You have been very, very thorough, and it's a fascinating field. So just earlier, Maddy and I, as we were waiting for the Zoom to start, we were talking about the social dilemma, and such a fascinating topic. So I knew this webinar was going to be an interesting one. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so happy that I was able to kind of help and answer questions. And we can keep going if you want.
Yeah, we have a few more questions here that I want to get to. We have quite a few product designers watching, and they're asking, what is the difference between product design and user experience design?
I don't think there is a difference, in my opinion. I think that user experience design might be a little bit broader. So if you're thinking about user experience design, that can also be web design, um, and that could even be like, think about the experience of opening an iPhone at the Apple store. Like that's experience design, user experience design, because it's the person is a user of the iPhone. And so that's really the broad um, topic. But then product design, I think of as you're designing interfaces for digital products. But I would say that the two phrases can be used sort of in place of one another. That's a good question. There's a lot of UX design lingo that gets thrown around. Like even the word case study, like a year ago, I didn't even know what a case study was. And now that's like what everyone is calling their projects and their portfolio. So it's just funny how words really do change in that way so quickly.
Yes, absolutely. I do case studies at Wacom, but they have nothing to do with your kind of case
Yeah.
study.
So funny.
Yeah. So you are also a creative resident at Adobe this year,
Mhm.
and we have a few questions about that. Diana wants to know if you can share your experience being a creative resident at Adobe. What does it mean? How has it helped you?
Absolutely. So basically the the whole program is the creative residency program. And within that there is the creative residency, which is a year long, which is what I'm participating in. And then the other half of the program is the community fund. And so that is something where Adobe funds people for 1 month to do either a project they're passionate about or to actually do a project for Adobe, like a commissioned project. So it's really cool. They've expanded the program a lot this year because of COVID. They wanted to just be able to fund more creatives than ever before. But going back to my experience as a year-long resident, it's really cool because the aim is to basically advance your career really, really quick. So within this 1 year, I'm able to really focus on the types of work that I want to do, building my portfolio, networking with people that I would not otherwise have access to, having mentors within and outside of Adobe that I wouldn't normally have access to. And I get a regular salary. And so that really just gives me, the time and the space to do all the stuff I want to do to advance my career. So it's been really awesome. And I not only have I gotten to focus on the work, but I've also gotten to do so many events like this where I'm speaking with other designers and teaching at workshops, and I'm becoming more active on Instagram, sharing what I'm learning, and even on YouTube. And so just like having this support system of Adobe has given me the freedom to just try all of these things, even separate from my design work that I've always wanted to try. I've always been passionate about education and might even want to teach down the line. And so just doing things like this is really, really fun for me and allows me to get better at speaking and all of that stuff. And so, yeah, I've just gotten so many opportunities and I can't say enough good things. You should definitely apply for the residency.
And just for people who are not familiar, like you are, like we are, about the residency, the disciplines that can participate,
Yeah.
which ones are they? Which ones do they include?
Yeah, good question. So it's not just for UX. You can apply as a UX designer, as a graphic designer, as a videographer, photographer, illustrator, and animator. So lots and lots of things, pretty much anything where you're using Adobe products, which is like all creatives. So yeah.
We have a few questions from Facebook. Somebody's wondering, you do share all the stuff on your website, on Behance, some of the case studies. How do you protect yourself so that these don't get stolen, these ideas?
Yeah, that is a really good question. And I don't think I thought about it enough in the beginning. Now I'm learning that it's important to think about, because on Instagram, I've had my content stolen 3 times now. And, it's not that big a deal. I can kind of brush it off, but it is definitely a hard, like, reality of sharing publicly what you're working on. And so when it comes to like what I am putting out on Instagram, meaning like what I'm sharing, the learnings that I'm sharing and the tutorials and things like that, that's really hard to protect. But when it comes to my work, like my actual design work that is being shown on Behance, um, you sort of just have to let it go and remember that, okay, if someone chooses to steal my work off of Behance and they get a job because of it, they're very quickly, the employer is very quickly going to realize that that person doesn't have the right skills. And so while it's so easy to steal things and work, especially creative work online right now, it's also really easy to tell when someone is not, doesn't have the skills and the knowledge that they say they do. It's really easy to spot a fake Instagram account. It's really easy to spot, a resume that's fudged, or, things like that. So that's sort of what I tell myself in trying not to worry about it. But yeah, maybe I'm not the right person to ask, because I'm not that careful.
In your opinion, can UI UX design be self-taught, or do you have to go to school?
I think it can be self-taught. I think if you're going to be self-taught, I would recommend either having a mentor or just getting feedback really, really often. So no one can learn in a silo. So yes, you can learn, you can be self-taught, but that doesn't mean that you don't need to lean on people and get feedback in order to grow. So you're never really going to know, what you're missing or what gaps in knowledge or understanding or skills that you have until you put your work out there, or even just share it with one person and get their opinion. So yeah, I would say there's tons and tons of online courses that you can do that are like really cheap, but I would say to be careful of those. Take what you can from them, but then also keep doing your own research and just keep getting feedback on your work. I always say if you're going to be self-taught, to learn by doing instead of just sort of watching 600 YouTube videos and like just consuming. I would put work out there, and that is a really good way to learn.
Thank you. Juliana wants to know, how do you see the field changing in the next few years? What excites you that's
Yeah,
coming?
so this comes back to what Elizabeth and I were talking about right before we hopped on about the social dilemma. So if you haven't seen the social dilemma, it's a documentary on Netflix that talks about the basically the downfalls of social media. But I think that also has a lot of implications for other digital products, in that we are starting to become so much more aware of the harms that it can do. And so I think a lot more people are, like me, seeking out more knowledge about how to design more mindfully. And honestly, that's what excites me. I'm not someone who is super, super into future tech. If you're interested in a designer that can be really inspiring that's into future tech, a woman named Patricia Rainers is the person to go to. She is all about future tech, AR, all of that stuff, but that's just sort of not my domain. That kind of thing excites me. But what more excites me about the future is that we are learning more about how to design for the well-being of humans. And I think that's becoming more and more important and more valued. And business models hopefully are going to start to change, and that kind of thing. Which, yeah, that's definitely what excites me, and I try to be hopeful about it for the future.
We're counting on you. Um, so Tracy is thinking of moving from graphic design, mostly print, to user experience, but she's worried about ageism. Have you had many coworkers over the age of 30 or 40?
That's such a good question. I think, okay, let's think. I really have not, to be honest. A lot of the people who are 30 or 40 years old have been in the design industry for a while, but if you are someone who has a really strong design background and you've been in print design for a long, long time, then that is something huge to bring to the table. It's sort of like a new or a, like, just like I was saying before, it's a differentiator. I think a lot of people are coming straight out of college, they're doing a boot camp, and then they're like, okay, I'm ready to be a UX designer without having tons of a design background, which I think is really important. And so, yeah, I think if you are interested enough to be a UX designer, then you must be interested in tech, and there's no reason that people should think anything, different of you just because you're a little older and you have more experience. I think if nothing else, I think that can be a plus in your column.
Yeah, you were talking about it earlier about, finding your own niche. Certainly there's, older app users who would benefit from, a more seasoned view uh,
100%.
on UX design. So
Yeah, and even on teams, like it's really, really important to diversify teams. So just because I haven't had a lot of 40-year-old people in their 40s on my team, like that's a bad thing that I have not. I think it's not good that all of these design teams are honestly made up of mostly white people in their 20s. Like that is something else that I think and hope is going to change. And so age is another part of that. And yeah, I think that can be nothing but helpful to have differing points of views and experiences.
yeah, those apps are going to get used by all kinds of people from all walks of life and all age groups. So for
Yeah.
sure. We do have quite a few recent grads in the audience, and they're looking to you for advice for landing their first job or getting ready for the job market during this time. Do you have any advice for these recently graduated people here?
I wish I had more advice than this, but my advice would really just be to keep practicing. If you don't get a job right away, keep making work and putting it in your portfolio and things like that. And keep applying because at a time like this, I know it's probably a little bit tougher to get a job, but at the same time, I think it's a really good opportunity because things are changing within a lot of companies, especially tech companies. And so, yeah, I think on the other hand, people are now able to hire remote, which might be a little bit, cheaper of a hire. And so things are really changing. Apply to a bunch of places, get experience where you can. Don't look for the absolute perfect job because COVID aside, your first job is never going to be the absolute perfect job. So, yeah, just get experience any way you can, freelance if you can't get a full time job right away, and just have confidence going into your interviews because I've found that the more I've been confident, the better the better the outcome is for me instead of being sort of showing that you're afraid and that you're new to the industry and that you're just out of college. Have confidence, you know what you're doing if you've gone through a program, things like that. And yeah, all of the good luck and good vibes to you all.
Absolutely. From Wacom too. We wish you all the best. We're at top of the hour, so I'm just going to ask a few more questions and wrap it up because it's been a really, really great talk. But it's time for you guys to go check out Maddy everywhere and read all of her Medium articles and YouTube material. She's very active. We have a few people here curious about the creative residency at Adobe. And do you have any tips to become a creative resident?
Yeah, absolutely. So my biggest tip is especially if you're applying with your own project, so whether you're applying to the creative residency or the community fund, both of those have opportunities to carry out your own project like I'm doing. And so when you're pitching, part of the application process is pitching that project. So the more specific you can be with your project, the better. And, you know, I know that firsthand, that is super, super important. So show that you have a plan, that you know what you want to do with your time and with your funding, and how explain how that's going to benefit your career, and be very, very specific on those things. Be flexible, but still specific about what you want to do. And yeah, that would definitely be my biggest tip. Don't be vague. Don't send in an application that, you know, doesn't have really any specifics to it. You want them to know that as soon as you get hired, you're going to hit the ground running and get your work done, and you know exactly what you're going to do. So, yeah.
Right on, there you have it. I did leave some information about the residency program and the community fund, but I will drop it in the chat again so that you guys can connect with Maddy. I also have shared her social media channels. Please go support her. She's wonderful, as you could tell.
What?
And I want to also thank Adobe's Julia Tian for introducing me to the wonderful Maddy. Without her, we wouldn't have met. So thank you, Julia.
Absolutely. Julia's awesome.
She is awesome. So, all right, guys, it's already 1:07 in my time zone. We're gonna let Maddie go back to her day and have some lunch. Thank you so much for everybody's time. It's been a really nice, very interesting talk. The chat was super polite and very engaged. Thank you so much for respecting the rules and asking everything through the Q&A. And thank you, Maddie, for being so thorough and so prepared to answer all these questions. I did hear some people here asking if they could friend you or reach out to you on LinkedIn. That's entirely up to Maddie. You guys can send a request and then we'll see if
Absolutely.
you guys connect, but she's available everywhere. Go check out her social media channels and we'll see you again soon on another Wacom webinar. I don't
Yeah.
think we have an again this week, but we're preparing a very nice comic week coming up. So stay tuned for that, guys. And anything else you want to add, Maddie, before we log off?
I don't think so. I'll just say that I don't go on LinkedIn all that much, but when I do, I will connect with you all. Instagram is definitely the best place to connect with me because that's where I am the most. But yeah, thank you so much, Elizabeth, for having me. This was really, really awesome, and it was great to hear from all of you and answer your questions.
Thank you so much for being a great sport. Thank you guys for being here. And this is a wrap. We'll talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.